Hi team, and welcome back to the Introduction to Japan Anchor series of printables and mini lessons. One of the most important symbols of Japanese culture in history is a policy implemented by the shoguns that we learned about last time in response to the European arrival. That's our topic today. That policy is called sakoku, and in this lesson we'll learn what it means. Last time, we talked about how the Yamato dynasty is the longest-lived dynasty in history. Its success can be attributed to two factors, religion and politics. The emperors were considered divine, but they also smartly created an imperial government using Confucianism imported from China and put a shogun in charge of the dirty work of imposing the will of the emperor by force. Everything changed, however, when in 1543, European merchants arrived in Japan for the first time. Europeans had been trying to get to Japan ever since Christopher Columbus. As many know, Columbus believed that when he arrived in America for the first time, he was convinced that he was near Japan, or Sipangu, as the Europeans called it. It took him a while to understand that he had arrived in the New World, eventually called America. A few years after Columbus sailed for Spain, the Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama finally circumnavigated Africa to arrive in India. Then, following the western route, Ferdinand Magellan reached the Philippines in 1522 by crossing the Pacific. Unfortunately, he then died. Japan itself was only reached by the Portuguese in 1543. These strange people from a far-off land were a curiosity to the Japanese, and there weren't many of them at first. One thing that really bothered the Japanese was that the Europeans did not bathe, so they were very stinky. The Japanese had a tradition of bathing and were used to being very clean. The Europeans believed that water carries germs, and they were right about that, but they didn't realize that if you boil the water, you can kill those germs. And you can take a wonderful soothing bath once the water cools, and it will do wonders for your health. Even though the Europeans were stinky, and often sported large beards, which was also uncommon among Japanese men, the Japanese were open to trade, which they had been happy to carry on with China for their long history. That by itself wasn't a problem. In 1549, however, the Christian missionary Francis Xavier arrived in Japan. Now, in the last lesson, I asked you to think about why the arrival of Christians in Japan would pose such a major problem. Did you think of the answer? Christianity holds that there is only one true God. Japanese Shinto belief holds that there are many Japanese gods. Can these two beliefs coexist? In the modern world, they can. In the modern world, we have learned the importance of religious toleration and freedom. We have a live and let live attitude when it comes to religion. In 1549, however, Europe had no such tolerance. Europe was in the middle of a disastrous period of religious wars sparked by the Reformation of Martin Luther and others. Christians were murdering each other by the millions over even small religious differences. This will feature in our Anchor Facts series on European history coming soon. That was bad enough, but the problem for the Japanese was that the issue of religious differences had a special dimension for them. If Christian missionaries taught the Japanese to believe in Christianity, what would that do to the divinity of the emperor and the loyalty of the people to that divine ruler? Clearly, it would destroy the idea that the emperor is divine, which is exactly what happened. In 1637, the Shimabara Rebellion occurred, when a Japanese convert to Christianity rebelled against the emperor. He was the clan leader of Shimabara. In response, he and his followers were massacred by the shogun. The emperor became convinced that Christianity could not be allowed in Japan. He ordered the shogun to implement the sakoku policy. Sakoku means isolation. Christianity was outlawed, and Europeans were limited to trade in the Japanese port of Nagasaki. Any European found in Japan who was not authorized to be there was killed on the spot by the samurai of the shogun. Japan closed itself off as much as possible. Here we see the origins of modern Japanese xenophobia. But could such a policy really last? What the Europeans and soon the Americans were conducting is what modern people call globalization. Globalization means the interconnection of the people and cultures of the world into a single web of movement, trade, and communication. Can one part of the world truly close itself off from that? There are a few examples, and Japan certainly did try. It was not allowed to maintain this policy, however, and it was America that kicked in the door. We'll see who, what, when, and why next time. See you soon.